My name is Britta de Groot, and I'm a junior studying music with a concentration in piano performance. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce the speaker tonight. John Steele Gordon was educated at Millbrook School and Vanderbilt University. His articles have appeared in numerous publications, including Forbes, National Review, Commentary, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. He is the contributing editor at American Heritage, where he wrote the Business of America column for many years, and currently writes the Longview column for Barron's. He is the author of several books, including Hamilton's Blessing, The Extraordinary Life and Times of Our National Debt, The Great Game, The Emergence of Wall Street as a World Power, The Business of America, Tales from the Marketplace, American Enterprise from the Settling of New England to the Breakup of AT&T, and An Empire of Wealth, The Epic History of American Economic Power. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gordon to the podium.
Good evening. I am both happy and honored to be back at Hillsdale College once again. Now, I'm here to talk about socialism in American history, which is to say, the history of socialism on very stony ground. Socialism is by definition an economic system wherein the means of production are held in common, that is, by the government. Socialism, therefore, necessarily concentrates power. For while the people might, in theory, own the means of production, only individuals can actually act. So socialism in all its many forms, from the democratic socialism of post-World War II Britain, to the unspeakable horrors of Pol Pot's Cambodia, to that weird combination, a communist monarchy in North Korea, means not only economic power to the people, but economic power to fiduciaries for the people. The same people who exercise political power. And as Lord Acton famously noted, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why in capitalist countries the rich become powerful, in socialist ones the powerful become rich. In a socialist economy, one is expected to work for the common interest, not one's own interest. But that's not easy to accomplish. For self-interest is, in the living universe, a force as all-pervasive and ineluctable as gravity is in the physical one. By having the means of production in the hands of individuals and corporations, capitalism both disperses power and takes advantage of self-interest. In other words, capitalism swims downstream. For socialism to work, it has to somehow negate self-interest. It has to swim upstream. To use the analogy of gravity again, we can negate gravity. That's how we got to the moon 50 years ago and how I got to Hillsdale College this morning. But it takes energy to do so. This is why socialist economies, even on a very small scale, have only worked for any length of time by the use of coercion. That's why the phrase democratic socialism, a phrase much in vogue these days, is largely an oxymoron. Now, we usually think of the United States as the most capitalist of all major countries, and it mostly is. While it may have been pure coincidence that the United States was born the very same year that Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, it was a most fortuitous one. Alexander Hamilton, who richly deserves the title Founding Father of the American Economy, was very familiar with Smith's seminal book, as were most of the Founding Fathers. Hamilton took its arguments very much to heart. When socialism was rapidly evolving into a coherent philosophy 3/4 of a century later, Karl Marx wrote in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, published in 1852 after Napoleon III had seized power in a coup d'etat, that, quote, "Men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered and transmitted from the past." But this country, unlike the European countries Marx was familiar with, had in fact precious little past to be transmitted in 1776. We are not a fully formed society with deeply entrenched economic interests and a well-developed class system. In effect, we were something like a national tabula rasa in the 1780s and 90s. So more than almost any other country in history, the United States could make itself as it pleased in ways that deeply suited the American character. It is worth noting that all but one of the 10 amendments to the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights protect individuals from excessive government power. It is this character, this passion to do as we damn well please under the rule of law, that has made this country such stony ground for socialism. Now, the American colonies benefited greatly from the mother country's benign neglect. Unlike France and Spain, England didn't care who went to its colonies, and indeed used the colonies as a dumping ground for convicted felons. It was Britain's inability to continue transporting felons to America after the American Revolution that led directly to the settlement of Australia in 1788. Perhaps they should celebrate July 4th, too. That meant that the population of early America was largely made up of people who marched to the beat of a distant drummer. Unlike their contemporaries in the poor economy of early 17th century Britain, they chose to take an enormous chance. They said goodbye to all that they had known and came to what one Puritan called a howling wilderness, in hopes of making a better and more prosperous lives for themselves and their posterity. As to how big a chance they were taking, consider this. In early Virginia, the death rate for immigrants in their first year was about 25%. After that, they were said to be seasoned, and their life expectancy increased considerably. And these risk-taking immigrants, of course, have been coming ever since. Thus, the propensity for taking risk was bred into the very DNA of this country. And the twin engines of capitalist success are a willingness to take risk and competition, neither of which are found in socialist economies, which is why they are both uninnovative and poor. Even the DNA of those felonious transportees, a total of about 100,000 during the colonial era, added a certain je ne sais quoi to the American genetic mix. That is not to say that this country has had no experience with socialism. Indeed, the early English settlements in this country were at first socialist enterprises, even though the very word socialism wouldn't be coined until 1833. The colony of Virginia was not established by the English government. Instead, it was founded by a profit-seeking corporation chartered by King James I in 1606, the Virginia Company of London. The stock was mostly owned by very wealthy London merchants. These were very savvy businessmen, but the company they founded was in a wholly new business, American plantations. And the steep learning curve to profitability that any new type of business necessarily entails would not be successfully climbed in this case. The Virginia Company invested, all told, about 50,000 pounds sterling in the enterprise, a colossal sum in the early 17th century, when the annual crown revenues from the tariff amounted to only about 75,000 pounds. Regardless, the company had collapsed by 1624, and Virginia became a crown colony. Indeed, the Virginia Company made just about every mistake that it could have made. Jamestown was sited badly, surrounded by mosquito-breeding swamps, and where the water was often brackish. This led to salt poisoning during the hot, humid Virginia summers. But the Virginia Company's biggest mistake was to keep title to the land, the means of production. The settlers were, in effect, to work it as peasants for the company's profit. But the company also told them that any gold they found was theirs to keep or sell. The settlers that the company had recruited, all men in the first year or so, another mistake, were mostly what were then called sturdy beggars, i.e. healthy men who had no employment and had gravitated to the burgeoning slums of London and Bristol, along with the younger sons of gentry families. The first group knew little about farming, and the latter was disinclined to do hard work. Pursuing their self-interest, as people always do, they preferred to search for gold from which they could profit directly. Of course, there is no gold to be found in the broad alluvial plains of Tidewater, Virginia, Although they found plenty of a form of mica that looked a bit like gold, they shipped it to England where it was found to be worthless. The result was starvation. Of the 104 settlers who had arrived in May 1607, only 38 were still alive 9 months later. In December 1609, the colony had 220 settlers. By spring 1610, only 60 were still alive. One man, crazed by hunger, had killed and eaten his wife. He was burned at the stake. The company tried other means to generate income. They established a glass factory, for instance, to take advantage of Virginia's abundant sand and wood, but the glass could not be profitably exported to England. Two developments saved the colony. One was the discovery of the cash crop, tobacco. After the Indians had taught the colonists the exacting art of growing and curing it, tobacco became very profitable indeed. The second was the abandonment of the company's policy of holding title to the land and expecting colonists to work it as sharecroppers. Indeed, the company began to use early America's greatest resource, its infinity of land, to entice settlers. They started to give every settler who had paid his own way 50 acres of land, along with 50 acres for each relative and servant brought to the colony. Thus, a family of 5 would get 250 acres of land. That much good agricultural land in land-poor England would have given that family gentry status. It was a powerful and thoroughly capitalist incentive. Those who would come as indentured servants were also given land once they had served their indentures. Food production rose sharply, and tobacco production soared from 20,000 pounds in 1618 to 1.5 million pounds only 11 years later. The American experiment was off and running, and Virginia's early socialist economy forgotten. Early New England which was also settled by profit-seeking joint stock companies, saw the land held in common as well, and thus saw poor results. In the Plymouth colony, despite the story of the first Thanksgiving, the harvest of 1621 had been poor. In early 1622, Governor William Bradford gave each family a plot of land, but he required that, quote, all profits and benefits that are not got by trade, working, fishing, or any other means were to be placed in a common storehouse, so that, quote, all such persons as are of this colony are to have their meat, drink, apparel, and all provisions out of the common stock. In other words, the settlers were expected to work the fields, to go out fishing and hunting, but the results were to be doled out to each family according to its size, not according to its contribution of labor. The result was a very poor harvest in 1622 and severe hunger in the winter of 1622-23. But Bradford, happily, was no ideologue. He could learn from experience. He wrote in his book of Plymouth Plantation, quote, the failure of that experiment of communal service, the taking away of private property, and the possession of it in community by a commonwealth, was found to breed much confusion and discontent, and retard much employment which would have been to the general benefit. For the young men who were most able and fit for service objected to being forced to spend their time and strength in working for other men's wives and children without any recompense. The strong man, or the resourceful man, had no more share of food, clothes, etc., than the weak man who was not able to do a quarter of what the other could. This was thought injustice. The aged and graver men, who were ranked and equalized in labor, food, clothing, etc., with the humbler and younger ones, thought it was some indignity and disrespect to them. Bradford decided that each family could grow and keep the food they raised. The change in attitude among the settlers was stunning. The women in 1622 had stayed home to tend the children, but in 1623, as Bradford explained, quote, the women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to set corn. Food production rose dramatically. Within a couple of years, the colony was able to export a load of grain to England. As the historian Nathaniel Philbrick explained in his recent history of Plymouth Colony, quote, the Pilgrims had stumbled on the power of capitalism. Although the fortunes of the colony still teetered precariously in the years ahead, the inhabitants never again starved. Of course, New England early turned to trading and shipbuilding, given the lack of a cash crop in New England's stony soil and long winters. And those early merchants knew all about capitalism, even though the word wouldn't be invented for another couple of hundred years. Indeed, many of them wrote at the tops of their ledgers, "In the name of God and profit." For these pious Puritan merchants saw personal economic success as a sign of God's grace. It'd be nice if Elizabeth Warren had the same attitude. Now, among the early settlers of colonial America were many groups seeking religious freedom, and the United States remains the most religious of Western nations. This yearning for moral and spiritual perfection, so much a part of the American character, has led to a plethora of new American-born religious sects, such as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-days, Seventh-day Adventists, the Shakers, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Christian Science, to name just a few of the more successful and long-lived. But it also led to many social experiments in a search for a new way of living, where property was to be held in common. The most famous of these projects was New Harmony, Indiana. It was founded in 1825 by a wealthy British industrialist named Robert Owen, who was one of the founders of the movement that came to be called Utopian Socialism. It got that name, by the way, because the founders of the movement believed that socialism could be achieved without class struggle, but rather by example. Demonstrate that society could work in a different and better way, and, as with Ralph Waldo Emerson's Better Mousetrap, the world would beat a path to your door. Marx and Engels dismissed this as utopian, and the term stuck. Marx and Engels, for once, were right. Owen put his money where his mouth was. In 1825, he bought an entire town, 20,000 acres, in the southwest corner of Indiana, plus the buildings and infrastructure from a German religious sect that had decided to relocate. He paid $150,000, a very substantial fortune in the 1820s. People were expected to provide their own household goods, to invest their capital in enterprises that would promote community independence and social equality. They would work for the community and be paid in credits at the town store, or they could buy credits there. There were troubles from the beginning. There was a shortage of skilled craftsmen, and the community could not produce enough goods to pay its way. Robert Dale Owen, son of the founder, described the people who settled in New Harmony, quote, as a heterogeneous collection of radicals, enthusiastic devotees to principle, honest latitudinarians, and lazy theorists, with a sprinkling of unprincipled sharpers thrown in. As to the town's prospects, he wrote that, quote, a plan which remunerates all alike will, in the present condition of society, ultimately eliminate from a cooperative association the skilled, efficient, and industrious members, leaving an ineffective and sluggish residue, in whose hands the experiment will fail both socially and pecuniarily. In other words, self-interest dooms such enterprises. The New Harmony experiment had collapsed within 2 years, and private property and individual pursuit came to the town. Now, there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of other attempts to establish socialist communities, but most have failed, although there is one in Virginia on 400 acres of what was once a tobacco farm that has been in operation for more than 50 years. After the Civil War, as the country industrialized at a furious pace, the wealth inequality increased at an equally furious pace. Enormous fortunes, epitomized by the 400 New York families invited to Mrs. Astor's annual ball, were piled up while industrial workers did not get anything like a fair share of the profits they helped create. The reason, of course, was that each big industrial corporation spoke with one voice, while there are often tens of thousands of workers, each spoke for himself. Now, industrial capitalism was something very new under the sun in the late 19th century, and the rules needed to make it function fairly and well could only be developed from experience. The stock market reforms of the post-Civil War era, the invention of independent accountants and generally accepted accounting principles in the 1890s, the Sherman and Clayton antitrust legislation of 1890 and 1914, the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887, and the Wagner Act of 1939 were what resulted. It was a process that would take about 50 years. And of course, the reforms have needed their own reforms over the years. The Interstate Commerce Commission, for instance, was meant as a check on the unbridled economic power of railroads. But it quickly evolved into a cartel protecting the railroads' profits and greatly inhibiting innovation in that industry. When its rate-setting powers were abolished in the 1970s, so that railroads and trucking firms could once again compete by means of price, the transportation sector of the GDP dropped from 15% to 10%. As transportation is what economists call a transaction cost, a necessary cost that does not increase the value of the product, prices of millions of products dropped as competition forced manufacturers to share the lower costs of transportation with consumers. It should be noted that we are today beginning to learn what rules are needed to properly regulate the new digital economy we now live in that has caused another surge in income inequality. Meanwhile, there were increased calls for socialism in American politics as a way to abate this increasing inequality, just as there are today. Among the leaders of this movement was Eugene V Debs, born in 1855 in Terre Haute, Indiana. He came from a middle-class family. His father owned a small textile business, but he dropped out of school at the age of 14 and went to work for a local railroad, earning 50 cents a day. He quickly identified with the working class and its economic problems in the new industrial age. Debs was a founder of an early labor union, the Industrial Workers of the World, remembered as the Wobblies, as well as the American Railway Union. The Pullman Strike of 1894, led by Debs after an initial hesitation, was one of a series of often violent strikes at this time. The Pullman Strike resulted in about $80 million worth of damage and 13 deaths. Charged with contempt of court for violating a federal injunction against the strike, he served 6 months in jail. During that time, Debs read widely about international socialism and emerged from jail a firm believer in it. Originally a Democrat, he had served 2 terms in the Indiana House of Representatives as a Democrat. Debs was a founding member of several socialist political parties. Socialism was never able to form a single coherent political party in this country, as socialist leaders, almost entirely intellectuals, endlessly split over ideological minutiae. There were social democrats, anarchists, communists, syndicalists, and many, many more. Debs joined the Socialist Party of America in 1901, a party formed that year from a merger of the Social Democratic Party and the Socialist Labor Party. He ran for president on its ticket 5 times. In 1912, he received 905,000 votes, fully 6% of the total vote. In 1920, he won 3.4% of the vote, although he was in jail for sedition at the time. The Socialist Party was adamantly opposed to American participation in World War I, and Debs had spoken out in favor of resisting the draft. Sentenced to 10 years, President Warren Harding commuted the sentence to time served in December 1921, after Debs had served nearly 3 years in jail. After the collapse of the Tsarist regime in Russia and the subsequent takeover by the Bolsheviks, along with this country's entry into World War I, the United States experienced the first of the 2 20th century Red Scares. There were reasons for these scares. There were numerous attempts, some successful, to bomb people and property. The Washington house of Woodrow Wilson's Attorney General, Mitchell Palmer, was badly damaged by a bomb in June 1919, although Palmer himself was not seriously hurt. And in September 1920, a whole wagon load of dynamite blew up in front of the Morgan Bank on Wall Street, killing 38 and injuring hundreds, 143 of them severely. Windows were blown out for blocks around. The facade of the Morgan Bank was scarred by the explosion, and the bank decided not to repair the damage, leaving it as a sort of stigmata of capitalism. It's still there, by the way, a minor Wall Street tourist attraction. But the fear generated by the Red Scare was far greater than the actual threat. Hundreds of aliens were deported, including such well-known ones as Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, who had tried to assassinate the industrialist Henry Clay Frick by one of those wonderful coincidences that history is so full of. The day he was deported was the day that Henry Clay Frick died of natural causes. And Berkman said, at least he left the country before I did. While the Socialist Party never came anywhere close to winning a presidential race, it had electoral success at the local and congressional levels. After the election of 1920 put 5 socialists in the New York State Assembly, they were summarily suspended and then expelled. They all ran in special elections and were re-elected, but again denied their seats. The Communist Party of the United States was founded in 1919 after the Russian Revolution as a split-off from Debs's Socialist Party of America. Unlike Debs's socialists, it supported the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is to say, the dictatorship of self-appointed fiduciaries for the proletariat. It was deeply involved in the American labor movement and through a variety of front organizations influenced many prominent people. During the Great Depression, membership grew to 55,000, at least according to the CPUSA, but it was from the first largely funded by and took orders from the Soviet Union. Immediately after World War II broke out in September 1939, for instance, the Communist Party's newspaper, The Daily Worker, began a long and frequent series of editorials demanding that this country stay out of the war. But on June 23, 1941, the paper, without even noting its about-face, began demanding the immediate entrance of the United States into the war. What had caused it to change its editorial mind? Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. This convinced many that the Communist Party of the United States was not a genuine American political party, but a foreign agent. Non-communist socialism's political popularity waned in the 1920s in this country, while increasing in Europe. Both Britain and France elected socialist governments in 1924. But Norman Thomas received only 2% of the vote in the election of 1932, despite the country being in the depths of the Great Depression, while there was widespread fear that capitalism and even democracy would not survive. New Deal programs, and especially the GI Bill of Rights in 1944, proved the death knell of socialism in America. By subsidizing both college educations and home ownership, the GI Bill lifted millions into the middle class with financial assets such as real estate. In other words, the proletariat became capitalists. But the same time saw a new Red Scare, thanks to the onset of the Cold War. People like Senator Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee hounded people before television cameras, but found relatively few actual communists, while ruining many lives and careers. Finally, in 1954, Senator McCarthy overplayed his hand, was censored by the Senate, and the second Red Scare began to fade away. While socialism disappeared as a political force after World War II, its last gasp was probably the presidential campaign of Henry Wallace in 1948. Conservatives have worried about at what point the social safety net ends and latter-day socialism begins. The Democratic Party has moved markedly leftward in the last few years, and today we are once again hearing calls from the far left for socialist policies such as Medicare for all and egalitarian policies such as a punitive wealth tax on those who have been excessively successful. Britain tried this tactic in the Labour government of Clement Attlee after World War II, when the top income tax rate in Britain was 104%. In other words, you were fined for creating too much wealth. That goes a long way to explaining why Britain's economic recovery after the war was so sluggish. Senator Bernie Sanders, himself a millionaire who owns 3 houses, says that no one should be worth $1 billion and would impose an 8% tax on the very, very rich, most of whom, by the way, made their own fortunes. 70% of the Forbes 400 are self-made men and women. And no one, of course, is any poorer because of the digital mega-fortunes that have been created in the last 40 years. Enriching the rich by immiserating the poor is very poor public policy. Just ask Louis XVI. Becoming super rich, as Jeff Bezos has, by giving everybody a better and cheaper way to shop, made all of us richer. Ideologues like Bernie Sanders, he had his honeymoon in the Soviet Union, please remember. As Stephen Sondheim once wrote, I've been to Moscow. It's very gay. Well, anyway, on the 1st of May. These ideologues are often invincibly ignorant of the most basic economics. Not only would a wealth tax be extremely hard and expensive to administer, it would have devastating effects on the entire American economy and the American population. If, say, Jeff Bezos had to pay 8% of his net worth in taxes every year, he would have to sell 8% of his vast holdings of Amazon stock. That, of course, would cause the price of Amazon stock to drastically decline. Indeed, just the market's anticipation of the sale would cause it to decline, costing Bezos far more than 8% of his net worth. And Amazon stock is held not just by Jeff Bezos, but directly or indirectly by millions of middle-class Americans in their 401k accounts, IRAs, pension funds, and annuity accounts. About 2/3 of corporate stock today is held not by plutocrats, but by ordinary Americans. Multiply Jeff Bezos' woes under a wealth tax by those of the other 620 billionaires in the country today, and you would have a stock market crash that would be worse than 1929. So a wealth tax, while sticking it to the Forbes 400, would also stick it to just about everyone in this room, not to mention Hillsdale College's endowment fund. I expect that these policies will get exactly nowhere. The wealth tax is, after all, almost certainly unconstitutional, as it is a direct tax that could not be apportioned among the states according to population. You could also make a good case that it is a bill of attainder. After all, Forbes magazine will supply you with a list of the 621 billionaires in this country. The overwhelming majority of Americans celebrate capitalist success, not decry it like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and do not want to kill the capitalist goose that has laid so very many golden eggs for so many people. They understand instinctively, thanks to those risk-taking entrepreneurial genes they inherited, that socialism, to borrow a phrase from George Orwell, is an idea so stupid that only an intellectual could believe it. The United States is still very stony ground for socialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. We now have time for some Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone in the aisle.
Yes, sir. The one thing you brought up, or at least touched on tangentially, was income inequality. How do you feel about the concept of the cooperative? Does that give capitalism a bit of a safety valve? I know it I mean, in a small sense, it's part of our economy, cooperative structures.
I mean, a corporation is a cooperative structure. People come together under a defined set of rules in hopes of making more money collectively than they could make individually. I mean, so there's nothing wrong with cooperative ventures. And if the people who are in that want to do it that way, that's fine. But the income inequality, every time you have serious new technology, you have a sudden inflorescence of new fortunes that are larger than the old ones were. I mean, in 1827, a young British writer coined the word millionaire in order to describe not the old aristocracy whose wealth is based on land, but the new industrialists who are much richer, usually in terms of cash. The aristocrats are often cash poor, or land poor as they call it. And that, by the way, that young writer went on to another profession. His name was Benjamin Disraeli. It happened again in the late 19th century with railroads, then automobiles, and what have you. And now it is happening with digital technology. Fortunes that were simply inconceivable even 40 years ago. I mean, 1982 was the first year of the Forbes 400, and you needed $82 million to make the list. And the richest guy was a guy named Ludwig, who nobody remembers anymore, who was worth, I think it was $2.1 billion. Today, you need 2.1 billion to get onto the Forbes list. There are about 200 American billionaires not rich enough to make that list. Now, nobody's gotten poorer because of these new fortunes. This is wealth that was created. It wasn't taken. I mean, something Elizabeth Warren thinks, capitalism is a zero-sum game like poker, where for every winner you have to have a loser. We are all winners. We are all winners. Anybody who's ever bought something from Amazon, or used Twitter, or found out where the hell you were through the GPS on your cell phone, we are all winners. There's no losers, which is, I wish people could just get that through their heads. I think they actually understand it, but they do politically. Politicians lie like rugs. And,
yeah, it's really kind of two questions. One quick one. When the polls mentioned people between the ages of 18 and 25, 50% say they would like to live in a socialist country. Do they really understand what socialist means? Do they understand that the government is the employer, is controlling? Are they just economically illiterate? And secondly, could you comment on capitalism in China?
Okay. I think an awful lot of those 18 to 24-year-olds went to propaganda mills masquerading as universities. Obviously they don't understand economics, they don't understand human nature. I mean, that's why socialism can't work, because of human nature, because we are self-interested and we pursue our self-interest. And people can't stop doing that. And a lot of people think that self-interest is greed. No, it's not. I mean, Mother Teresa was self-interested, and what made her happy was spending her life in the slums of Calcutta. What made Jeff Bezos happy was making $160 billion. And as for capitalism in China, China is a very weird hybrid at this moment. It is capitalist in some ways, but of course it is a complete tyranny in others. And there's still huge state enterprises, most of which are very inefficient, as state enterprises tend to be, and they keep getting bucked up by the Chinese government. I don't think that's a stable system in the long run. And China, remember, you can't trust Chinese statistics. They make them up, just like the Soviet Union did. There's a lot of unrest that you don't hear about, because if reporters report it, they suddenly find themselves no longer in China. But only about, I think it's 65% of the Chinese population is Han Chinese. The rest are all, Uyghurs out in Xinjiang, Manchus up in Manchuria. There's all kinds of ethnic minorities in China, and many of them are not happy. Now, China's got firm control. I mean, they're not going to go gentle into that good night, I promise you. But I don't think in the long term you can have this capitalist tyranny sustained, but we will see.
My question relates to the last gentleman. You mentioned that socialism so far has had a stony ground in the United States. With the plurality of millennials embracing socialism or appearing to embracing socialism, do you find that a little bit of an alarming statistic?
Yeah, it's very alarming. But I think once they get out into the real world, they'll probably have to wise up. Show me a socialist economy that has been successful. There aren't any. So why should we have a socialist economy here when we've had the most successful economy in the history of the world? So let's get rid of that idea that works and get one that has a proven track record of failure. It's just, the mind boggles. So.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering, you mentioned earlier that there was an experiment on the East Coast of a socialist, like a community that did work and that still survived for 50 years. Why is that?
Well, it's a very small community, and people are free to come and go. And so people, they try it out for a couple of years, and they move on, and other people, move in. And I think it's not a tyranny. It's, people are free to come and go. They're not forced to be there. and they can go outside it and earn money on the outside. I mean, they're free people who choose to live in this very small community and do things together. And I think there's 60, 70 people live on that place, and that smaller group can do very well, just like hunter-gatherer groups in the Paleolithic did very well, and essentially it was the same kind of system.
Can you comment on our fiat currency and its perceived stability in our capitalistic economy?
Could you say that again?
Can you comment on our fiat currency stability and how you think that might impact our capitalistic economy?
Okay, well, every country in the world now has fiat currencies. And what keeps them honest is the currency trading market, which trades around $5 trillion a day. And in the early 1980s, the president of France, François Mitterrand, tried a socialist agenda. He nationalized the French banks and on and on and on. The currency market tanked the French currency to the point where Mitterrand had no alternative but to back off. And that's what we got rid of inflation. In the 1970s, inflation roared in this country. In 1980, the prime rate was 20%, which is really awesome. But then the currency market got big enough, it got globalized enough so that it can act as a single unit, basically. And that's what keeps politicians from printing too much of the stuff. And occasionally there are countries like Argentina, which does it over and over and over again. And then they keep re-electing Peronistas over and over and over again. It's really, Argentina's a wonderful country, but their politics is just bizarre. Makes French politics look good. I think our money is under control at the moment. And also we have if Congress could print money, then we'd be in serious trouble, but they can't, only the Fed can do that. So that's one of the Hamilton said, don't let politicians anywhere near the power of printing money.
One of the most effective enemies of capitalism are the capitalists themselves. Bill Gates is giving away his money by the billions, trying to buy himself a Mother Teresa halo. Why are they doing that? What is their view of morality, that they consider Mother Teresa would help the few people out of the gutter better than the people that got rid of the gutter?
Herbert Hoover famously said that the trouble with capitalism is capitalists. And he's right, because capitalists are all too happy, or many of them are, to become rent seekers if they can get away with it. And in this world, they can very frequently. The government gives them special little fiddles on the side. The tax code is corrupt from page 1 to page 56,000. And half of it is literally little quiet fiddles to people who make big political contributions. But I'm afraid, again, that's human nature too. If you can get a cheap buck, you're going to take it. And who can blame them? So it just, we are not angels, as James Madison so astutely pointed out. And that's true of capitalists, and it's true of politicians, and it's true of university professors. So. Even the occasional speaker.
So according to the World Healthcare Organization, like the American healthcare is around, I think, 36 on the list, whereas like the French healthcare and like Canadian healthcare are in front of the American one. So I was wondering, why do you think socialized healthcare is like this can be higher up on that list than the American one if like they should be more innovative and more functional?
There's two things here. One is statistics. In many European countries, a baby that dies very shortly after birth is listed as a stillbirth. Whereas in this country, if a baby is born struggling, they move heaven and earth to keep it alive. And if they lose it, it's an infant mortality. So we have a higher infant mortality rate than Britain and France and other countries do. But that's a statistical thing. The other thing is the American healthcare system is a complete mess. I mean, it's the best system in the world, but it's in terms of, you know, its ability to cure the incurable. But it's economically, it is terrible. I mean, there's no price transparency in the United States. I mean, you go to a hospital and say, I need my knee replaced, how much would you charge? They won't tell you. And then you get this bill that's this thick, and you know, one aspirin tablet, $2.50, and what have you. And Donald Trump is actually trying to get them to do this, and both the insurance companies and the hospitals are fighting tooth and nail to prevent it. If they were forced to post their prices everywhere, and so every hospital had to say, we'll do a knee transplant for X, then immediately what would happen? The competition would force people to lower their prices. And we could drain at least $2 trillion a year out of American healthcare simply by making them post their prices. But the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Associations are extremely potent lobbies in Washington. But that would go a long way to solving healthcare. We have too many hospitals in this country, very hard politically to close them. What we need is more specialty hospitals like Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, the great cancer hospital, and then urgent care places. And then small towns need maybe small hospitals, and if somebody's really sick, then they ship them off to a major metropolitan area. But we have too many hospital beds at the moment, which is also very expensive.
John, thank you for your talk. One thing I would recommend to everybody is they read his books, starting with Hamilton's Blessing. It is a fantastic work. As for a question, my question has to do with inflation. How come we don't have it, even though we've printed so much money? Is it because of our incredible productivity, or is it bad data that we're not actually seeing it being reported correctly? What do you think?
One reason is the digitalization of the economy, as enormous efficiencies are built into that. I mean, so it's, as I say, Amazon, again, I'm always talking about Amazon. I only go there 2 or 3 times a week. They're able to sell things at a much lower cost than brick and mortar because there's such enormous economies of scale. And Walmart too. Walmart is economic power so that it can force its suppliers to really cut things to the bone. And so that's what I think has kept inflation under check in this revolution that we've been undergoing for the last 30-odd years.
I haven't understood this because the same car I bought. All right, sir, can you use the microphone? The same car I bought.
Yeah. Use the mic.
The very same car I bought in Charleston, West Virginia 22 years ago is 2.5 times the cost now.
Yeah.
So that's inflation, isn't it?
Well, no, you have a much better car today.
Well, no. I mean, how is it any better?
Well, they last a lot longer than they used to. They have all kinds of wonderful gadgets like GPS. I noticed I got in the car this morning to get to the airport, and the car had automatically changed the clock to daylight saving time. And I thought that's really neat, because I never remember to do that. And I mean, cars are pretty mature technology, basically. But I bought my first computer in 1986. It had a 12-inch black and white cathode ray monitor, a dot matrix printer, which was terribly noisy and only did one typeface. I had 8 megs of RAM and 20 megabyte hard drive, which I thought in 1986, that was pretty sexy. In 2019 terms, it cost dollars, it cost around $7,000. Today, I have a 24-inch high-def, flat-screen, full-color monitor. I have an inkjet printer. I have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I have a terabyte of hard drive. That's 50,000 times as big as my first hard drive 30-odd years ago. and the whole system cost around $1,200. So that's a technology that's rapidly advancing, and so the prices are rapidly collapsing. Whereas automobiles are, they've been around since 1896 when there was a Mercedes. Mercedes was the daughter. I forget the man's name who invented the carburetor, which was the last little gizmo needed to make the car work. Carburetors, of course, have long disappeared. So I think that's mostly it. We just get better and cheaper at making these things, and they're better things too. It used to be a car that lasted 100,000 miles, even if you took good care of it. That was good. Now 200,000 miles is by no means unheard of.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, I'm curious if you identify any inconsistency or incongruence between the right's simultaneous rejection of socialism on the far left with their embrace of protectionist policies at the same time. Because a lot of people might classify those as the type of rent seeking that you were just mentioning a few moments ago.
All manufacturers think that their suppliers should be highly competitive, but their customers should have no choices. Again, welcome to human nature. So protection is a bad idea just of itself, but we're always going to have tariffs because for some reason, sometimes we have strategic reasons for having tariffs. We have to have an airplane industry in this country. You can't be a great power without an airplane industry. But it also, you can use it as a political tactic, as Trump is using against China right now. But high tariffs never work. Because again, a tariff is a tax. So it drives up the price for everybody else and allows manufacturers in this country to be less efficient. They're hidden behind tariff walls. They don't have to work hard. And nobody works any harder than they have to accomplish their goals. Lions don't chase the fast zebras to get supper. They chase the slow ones who taste just as good. I have it on the best authority. All right, thank you very much. Yeah.